I've been watching the new series Alien Earth, and that inspired me to go out and actually do a Xenomorph. And then I came across this little beauty. It's a Xenoborg. As soon as I saw this 3D file, I knew this was it. This was the one I had to build. But before I did any type of 3D printing, I knew I wanted to modify the base. The original base feels a bit plain, so I thought I'd do something really imposing. So using the 3D software Blender, I put together a whole bunch of greeblies in the virtual world, and I created this rock plinth so I can give it a far more menacing pose. I then sent off the 3D file to Orca Slicer, and this is the software that I use for my FlashForge AD5X filament printer. The reason I'm going to 3D print the base is so at a later stage I can redo it, but in a much larger scale. At the moment, this Xenoborg is going to be over 400mm in height. The great thing about this particular file are all the pieces are already pre-supported. That saved me a truckload of time. The base took 10 hours to print, and the alien took about 27 hours. Now I printed that on a PHROZEN Mega S printer. It's great having this size printer because I was able to do the whole thing in one hit. I then let it drip for about 10-15 minutes to get rid of some of the excess resin. I then removed the build plate from that handy little drip hook and then moved on to my preparation station. Now what I normally do is I use this larger scraper to scrape it off, but sometimes if it's a little tight, I use a smaller scraper and that just lifts up the edge. I then go in with the bigger scraper and just pops right off. I've never had a failure where the model pops off the build plate. I have had a couple where the supports were a bit weak the way I set them up and the model's pulled away from the supports, but otherwise that perforated plate works really well. And because I haven't had any failures, there's no need for me to empty the vat out of the resin, and I only do that if something goes wrong. I have previously done a full review of the PHROZEN combo. Go check it out if you're interested. What I have here is a tub full of some old IPA that I'd previously used in my wash station. To clean the resin pieces, all I do is give it a bit of a shake in the old IPA and wash off as much as I possibly can for the next stage. And this is a really simple process. Make sure you're wearing protective gloves. You don't want to get that stuff on your hands, especially with the leftover resin that's kind of floating around in the tub. The next step is to give it a good wash in some clean IPA. For that, I'm using the PHROZEN wash, the Mega S, which is the part of the combo. I then just place everything into the little basket there. And again, it's such a huge little basket area. I can do the whole model in one hit. The Xenoborg is modelled in 1/6 scale, so it's a decent size. The wash station can hold up to 24 litres. I've personally only got about 15 litres in there. I then switch over to high and give it about anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes to wash. The pieces in this model are quite large and pretty solid, so using it in the high mode is fine. It's not going to cause any damage whatsoever. For smaller, more fragile pieces, you can use the low setting. I then set the basket on its side and let it drip dry for about 10-15 minutes. My next step is to remove the supports. So what I have here is a plastic bowl full of hot tap water. Don't use the water out of a kettle, that's way too hot. I'll leave the model piece in the hot water for about 15 to 20 seconds. And once that's done, it just peels right off. It's so easy to do and leaves very, very little residue behind. At the same time, it's removing most of the IPA that's left on there, and off camera I gave it a good wash with some soapy warm water. Now to the curing station, and here I'm using the Mega Cure from PHROZEN once again. This is a huge volume inside this curing station, and I'll put that in there for roughly about 5-6 minutes. That's all it needs. This curing station also works as a dryer, so you can leave it in there for an extra 15 minutes and set it so it dries out the model first. I pretty much do the same process for every 3D print that I do. It's become a bit of a routine and an easy one at that. Now that we've got all our model prepared, let's have a look at the detail. The original creator of these 3D prints done some amazing detail on the Xenoborg. I really love the look of this thing. The Xenoborg has a great mechanical look to it. I'll leave a link to the model in the description. The creator has no idea I'm doing this video, so let's surprise him and give him some support on the model. It's a great piece of work, so yeah, let's support him. I printed this as a hollow model, so it's got a 3-4 vent holes in there for the excess internal resin to escape. And to fill up those holes, I'm just using some of this bonding resin from Let's Resin, and to just give it a dot of it underneath, and then hold it upside down so it forms a bubble, and then hit it with a UV torch for about 10 seconds, and that hardens it, and we're ready. It's done. That's all we need to do. And for the base, after I printed it and had a good look at it, it kind of felt it needed more texture to it. So here I'm covering the whole thing with some PVA glue and giving it a nice thick coat of it, and then I'm just sprinkling a bit of tile grout on top of that. Once that PVA glue dries, that should give me a really nice finished, hopefully rock looking type texture to it. I bought a kilo of this tile grout, seems to be lasting forever. All the pieces need some primer, so I'm using some of this paint from Rust-Oleum, and it's a paint primer, and it's a flat black that I'm using. I gave all the pieces about 2 or 3 very light coats and slowly built it up so I wouldn't get any drips and get a nice even finish to it. The primer came up so well that I'm just going to use that as my base colour. I'm using some of this green stuff well. This is the Colour Shift Dark Blue. I'm using that to give it a really cool looking metallic finish to it. You get the best results if you use a black background with that color shift. It really gives it that, well, that shifting in color. As you look at it at different angles, sometimes it looks blue and other times it looks purple. To bring out the detail in the Xenoborg, I'm using some of this light metal dry brushing paint from Ammo. Using a dry brushing brush, I then lightly hit the raised areas of the model. This technique brings out all the fine detail in the alien model. Once I'm confident I hit all the finer areas, I then go in with a slightly heavier technique and hit the panels. This adds a bit of wear and tear to the bodywork. This dry brushing technique really starts to bring the model to life. And you can see the detail there, it looks amazing. That color shift is really cool. Really happy with that. That is one massive mechanical tail. Pretty sure I don't want to be speared by that thing. Here I'm going back in with some flat black to paint in the hoses. The reason for that is I don't want them to have a silver look to them. So I'm using some of this Panzer Grey to dry brush those hoses, so they look a bit more rubbery rather than metallic-y. Is that a word? Well, it is now. It also creates a very distinctive contrast between the metalwork of the alien. I'm using some of this steel paint from Vallejo, and I'll be painting the hose joints so it creates a lot more visual interest amongst all that mechanical bits in his body. In the original 3D files, you get a choice of 2 heads. One that's snarling and the other one has that inner tonguey thingy that pops out. Now I'm going to use some of this Tamiya panel line accent color, which is a very thin ink, and I'm using this to bring out even more of the detail in those hoses. And also I'll use it in some of those little areas for the mechanical bits, specifically some of the silver bits that I've painted to pop out a bit more against all that black that's in the body. Now I bought this bottle of ink years ago and it seems to be lasting really well. I've done so many pieces with it. Onto the base, and you can see the textures come up pretty well actually. It's nice, I'm happy with that. But obviously I'm not going to leave it black because blacks are very boring, so I'm going to give it a wash of 3 different colors. I'm starting off with some of this blue, and it's basically poster paint, heavily thinned down. Then I'm going with a red. Don't panic, this actually tones down quite a lot when it dries. And a final third color, I'm using some of this green. I'm letting all the colors blend in together. And this is what it looks like when it dries. That's really interesting, isn't it? Really happy with that. Love the tones and the colors that I chose there. But we need to bring out more detail, so I'm using some of this light gray. Again, a dry brushing paint. And I'm just hitting up some of the edges and to add a bit of depth to the plinth. In retrospect, I probably should have used a slightly darker grey. Now for the exciting bit. We've prepped, we've painted, now it's time for the assembly. The Xenoborg is put together with some super glue. It's mainly the adhesive that I use. You can use two-part epoxy glue, but I tend to use super glue because it's quicker, it's easier. Let me know in the comments what you think of the paint scheme. I really like the colour shift, and there are a whole bunch of different type of colour shift combinations, purples and blues, reds and greens and yellows, that type of thing. This whole build probably took me about 2 days to actually paint and assemble it. Took me probably another almost 2 days to print all the parts up. So the whole project was kind of spread over about 4 days. And there we have it. The whole thing's now finally completed. So let's go and check out the turnaround video to see what it actually looks like. I think the Xenomorph is one of the most iconic creatures ever created, and to see it as a Borg is pretty cool. In the meantime, go and check out some of my other videos that I've created, and thanks for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in my next video.